more in touch with the news and stuff than I am in research. I know you have a thought.
Yeah, but like like in 2016 with the whole like Hitler clown thing.
Clowns! Yeah! Yeah. Yeah, there's videos of them out. Yeah. And yeah, that certainly makes sense. Other things that come to mind. Right now, like the ones that work their way like the nerdy academic side of Twitter. And so that's probably not the problem. Well, like the phones in schools, like people like me are really interested in what the research says about phones. And you remember the violent video games thing? Yeah. Any example that you have, like, anything about it, for today, it'd be a great hackback question. Like, would this qualify as that's a great cheesy hackback question. Give it some thought. Maybe you can come up with an example or two on your own. Um, I think there's a bunch that are related to COVID. And there's a bunch that you could go down that rabbit hole or related to COVID. And like disproportionate responses to things for the past week. You could definitely go down those as examples. Super criminology. Well, scholars have identified two clear crime-related moral camps that were really important and that echo in their importance to this day. And they include the drug epidemic of the 1980s, moral panic related to drugs in the 1980s and drug crime, and then violent crime in the 1990s, especially that committed among kids, especially violent crime committed among juveniles, so people like in the 14 to 16-year-old range. In the mid 1980s, issues related to drugs accounted for something like 1% of news coverage. You can assess as a parent, like what proportion of news coverage that is up. It takes a long time to do this research, by the way, but it's really fascinating. That increased to something like 6% in 1986, and then declined back to 1% a year later, 3 years later. Something similar happened in 1990, where media coverage related to crime, especially violent crime among kids, increased 400% between 1992 and 1993. And then it sort of subsided a little bit thereafter. A lot of the emphasis again is on crime among juveniles. That's kind of a unique offending population. One reason that there was particular emphasis on juvenile violent crime was that there were a few key sort of events, like tragic events that happened related to juvenile crime. And a couple of academics, like 2 or 3 in particular, including some criminologists, who basically anticipated that the proportion, the share of offenders who engage in serious crime is more or less the same. Maybe we can even call them the life versus offenders using Moffat's hypothesis. The life versus offenders, those 2 cases were really serious stuff, right? It's really bad. That their share of the population, the argument went, is fairly possible. So what was poised to happen was that the baby boomers kids who all come of age around the same time. That was what was anticipated. Baby boomers kids were all going to be coming of age at the same time. And by coming of age all at the same time, by coming of age and beginning the peak of the age time all at the same time. I'm glad to have this conversation because we're like stuff. We all spend a little bit of share vocabulary, symbolic interaction, inaction, reaction. So when that happened, and all these baby boomers kids were hitting the peak age of involvement at the same time, the law number of life purpose offenders basically going to be larger. And so as a result, the amount of serious crime that was expected to happen to them, the story goes, was supposed to like increase exponentially. That was the argument, right? There's just more kids. And where there are more kids, there's going to be more really bad kids, and they're going to be involved in the same amount of serious crime. There's going to be more of it, exponentially more of it. That was the argument. But they're wrong. I mean, crime up for a variety of reasons. Um, it didn't seem, and that was just one example of a kind of disproportionate, incorrect prediction about the same kind of thing could be said about the capital government in the argument at the time that it was going to like disperse into previously safe, basically white middle class neighborhoods. Then you're going to see the explosion of crack cocaine into previously safe spaces. That was the argument. And again, the argument was also there's going to be this massive increase in juvenile crime moving into the mid 1990s. It didn't materialize. But there really wasn't any evidence that crack cocaine was going to like explode as a social phenomenon. So they involved a kind of disproportion, they involved distortion, they involved exaggeration and misunderstanding. We talked about what the crime rate did. It didn't go up, went down. Famously went down. But what didn't go down is fear of crime and public concern about it. One way that we measure and study the amount of fear of crime and public concern about crime is through survey. One of the most famous surveys is the General Social Survey. That's, I think, the 1970s. It's a national representative sample. And if you were able to see that, is there any area within a mile of your home where you would be afraid to walk away? We're talking about an increase of only 2% points, 8 or 10%. But as we mentioned, that's a massive increase for public opinion survey. That's a massive increase. It's something that gets attention. And it's fueled by things like media coverage. And emphasize, like, yes, we need to do more of the social control stuff. We need to deal with this problem that's been urgent. It's mostly related to kids, but not all. There's a violent crime problem. You could even argue that we're kind of undergoing a similar moral panic about crime right now. I had a conversation with my mother. It must have been yesterday. When I get the kids off of school, it's over my house. She lives across the street. I kind of lived in everybody lives right in my house. You remember that show? My mom's across the street. Send the kids off. My mom comes over. Like I'm really worried about trip levels. It's worried about crime also. I'm like, Mom, I'm not worried about crime. Where are you gonna be hanging out in the house? She's like, there's a hotel near the airport. No. Promise you, you're gonna be fine. At your hotel near the airport. It's probably a swanky hotel. You're gonna be okay at your hotel near the airport. Now I gotta go pick up my friend in the evening from the airport. Like, are you gonna get out of the car? It's like, no, like you're gonna be fine. And she's kind of be forgiven for thinking this because again, constant people in crimes and race, they're always the same. Always gonna say that. People always thinking the crime is decreasing. Even when it's going down, precipitously. People just aren't aware of that. People's perceptions of how much crime is out there, who is committing it, where it's most likely to happen, and their own personal victimization is all of those perceptions are all wrong. Right? And even my mother, who is like not a dumb person, she's an MD, and she doesn't understand how much, and she has a son in criminology, and she doesn't know where crime happens, and that is going down. As we talked about a little bit in 2024. Worry about this. Because it's not saying moral panics about crime. We can argue that something really, really similar is happening right now in the context of immigration. But in the 1990s and the 1980s, we had these clear moral panics. First one about drugs, and the second one about juvenile violence. There are a couple of reasons why these specific moral panics happened. One was that there basically wasn't enough news. Not enough things were happening. So they had to fill the air. It's one possibility. Another possibility is that that in and of itself produced a kind of sense or a perceived need to compete with other news networks to stay on top of an emerging news story that emerged simply because there wasn't enough other news. There was also at the time extensive discussion about tough on crime policy. And so candidates across the aisle were interested in demonstrating themselves as tough on crime. Nobody really remembers, well, some people do. Nobody really remembers that Joe Biden, as a political figure in the 1990s, was like a leading figure in the tough on crime movement. That's how sort of short our public consciousness is sometimes. He was one key figure. Tough on crime movement. Everybody was. This was like the discussion of the first George Bush election, 1990. This is what people were talking about. The Bush Dukakis debates. I mean, it was this whole thing. This was absolutely something that was on the minds of people, including political actors who were interested in scoring political points in winning elections. There also were, as I've noted, several examples and one of highly publicized police events that sometimes involved white victims and black offenders. Right? They involved white female victims and black male offenders. In particular, this was something this was something that people were talking about and that made it into the news coverage for kind of obvious. What happened? A lot of things happened, including at the federal level, but especially at the state level. You had states doing all different kinds of things. Federal government governs the federal courts, states govern state courts, obviously. So what we saw was a massive increase in the number and type of offenses that would allow juveniles to be sentenced as adults in adult court. You're enabling prosecutors to be able to move juvenile cases to non-violent to the adult that 15-year-olds and younger to be prosecuted and sentenced as adults, then go to adulthood. Which is sort of like you'll get transferred and then you used to go and then you go to adulthood. And there's all these sort of like slogans that were promising throughout that time. That was sort of leading to that. So you would have those kinds of you'd have general tough on crime related to sentencing generally. You would have an increase in mandatory minimum sentence through strikes laws. The idea that criminal justice is really important rational component that you use to dictate how much time that you get. Very controversial thing, especially nowadays. We're reassessing what sentencing guidelines periods look like, competition or not look like. But this was what happened. It began in the 1980s with drug crime law reform, and then it continued into the 1990s with a special focus on kids, special focus on redoing of the juvenile justice system. Again, was founded more than 100 years ago to lobby for the path with white women, and then 100 years later, we're basically making it the juvenile court, like the adult court junior, is making its procedures and its sentences or its dispositions look like adult court. That was what was happening as a result of moral panic associated with crime over the past 40 years. What this means is that moral panics aren't just like kind of interesting blip on the radar. I think it's a social phenomenon that is interesting. Why do they happen? What are their consequences? Well, their consequences can be more long-term than the moral panics yourself. Moral panics can go away in months or years, or maybe even days, weeks. But a lot of these policies are just now being revisited by like sentencing guidelines. So the policies and laws that are implemented as a result of moral panic, obviously still happen, public notification, interventions, all that. They are long-term. They can be extensive consequences of moral panic. Even though the moral panics themselves are long, even though they don't. So what do moral panics do? Why do they exist? It's a really interesting question. Why do they exist? Why do they happen? Why can't societies just be normal? Why can't they assess these things as they occur? a question that sociologists ask, including Sandy Cohen, is what is their